Hello, welcome everyone to this webinar and Nordregio studio in Stockholm. So today's webinar is called Where are the boys in climate action and how to break the bubbles and join forces. My name is Åsa Ström Hildestrand and I work here at Nordregio under the Nordic Council of Ministers in Stockholm, Sweden. And today we will launch a new report written by Nick, our colleagues in the Nordic family, the Nordic Information on Gender. And together we have a project called Youth for Sustainable Living. And this new report is called Climate, Youth and Gender Inclusion Strategies for Nordic Youth Movements. And that is obviously today's topic. So we will dig into the trends and patterns of youth engagement and commitment to climate action. What keeps boys and other groups from getting involved and what attracts them? How can we build more inclusive and diverse youth movements across the Nordics? We will hear from the report author and also from the Youth Survey Institute Ungdomsbarometern, followed by comments from 3 experienced youth organization representatives, and then, most importantly, open the discussion to all of you. So we're really happy to see many of you joining now live, and we have more than 170 signups today. So it's also important to know that we're recording this session and we'll of course share the recording, the presentations and the report afterwards. So you'll get it by email this week. And how can you get involved? Well, there is of course a chat in this Zoom window, and I'm sure most of you are familiar, but find and locate the chat and just get started. And you can of course ask questions, but also if you work for a youth organization or have other experiences of working with diversity, inclusion, or have thought about this issue, please share your thoughts and comments. And also let's introduce my colleague Sara Melander, who will moderate the chat. How are you, Sara?
I'm well, thank you, Åsa. I'm here and I'm monitoring the chat, so don't hesitate to, like Åsa said, just drop your questions, feedback, input, and I'll try to pick them up as we go. So thank you, Åsa.
Perfect. As I said, today's session will be recorded and you'll hear back from us afterwards. So today's first keynote speaker is Johanna Göransson, and she is representing Ungdomsbarometern, or the Youth Barometer, a Swedish company who's been surveying youth since the early 1990s. So welcome, Johanna. Today you will share some not yet published results actually from your most recent study about youth. And we're very curious to know more about the trends when it comes to youth interest in societal issues like sustainability and gender equality. And of course, which are the main gender gaps and how we could address some of these. So very welcome.
Thank you so much for that very nice introduction, and thank you for having me, everyone in the audience. I'm very excited to be here. I think Åsa gave a very good introduction to Ungdomsbarometern. As she said, we are a research company that are solely focused on understanding young people in Sweden today. The results that I will show you in the presentation are based from our annual survey that is conducted in the age group 15 to 24 and has a respondent base of approximately 15,000 respondents. So it's one of the largest youth surveys conducted in Sweden. And we're going to cover some topics, look into what societal engagement looks like at the large scale in the entire youth population before we head into talking about those very engaged people in the youth organizations today. So let's start. I wanted to show you first what we see when we look at interest in societal issues. So one of the main questions that we have in our study is looking at what interests, activities, topics young people engage with today. This question is posed as, how interested are you in domestic or foreign policy or societal development? And I know that in the report that's going to be introduced later today, there's some talk about the Greta effect, which I think that we've all heard and maybe even felt ourselves, and that can clearly be demonstrated in this graph that we see here. We really do see a peak in interest in societal issues among young people in Sweden around 2018. And then we see sort of a decrease quite quickly at the years following during the pandemic years. So we have a small increase in the election year. We always see bumps when there's an election year, but overall there's a decrease in societal interest among young people today. And here it's also good to note that we do see a gender pattern starting here, that we have boys actually more interested in societal issues and in policy issues today. But that changes quite quickly when we start talking about how young people view society today. So one of the other key questions that we have in our survey is asking young people, in which direction would you say that the development of society is heading? And here we have quite a spread over. A lot of people feel like society is moving in the right direction, but the largest part here is actually young people saying that I feel that society is moving in the wrong direction. And that's sort of the way that we see the development going. More and more young people feel like society is heading in the wrong direction. But here we also see quite a big gender divide. So we have young girls and young women feeling like society is increasingly going in the wrong direction, while young boys are a bit more optimistic towards where society is going today. So if we compare that to the results we saw before, we have young boys more interested in societal issues, but they are also more positive towards the development of the society that we live in today. So that's where we're at in talking about interest in society, where they feel that society is heading today. We're gonna go into a bit of the political issues and talk about what political issues do young people today feel are the most prioritized. So we ask each year, which of the following issues listed do you feel are the most important issues today? And here we see that we have quite quick changes over time. We see when we look specifically at the climate issue that this is taking a downturn in how prioritized that issue is among young people today. Just looking from 2019, we see a drop from 55% to 34% in the number of young people, or the percentage of young people saying that that is a prioritized issue for them. So we also see that young people at large are less interested or less prioritize the environmental issue less today than they did a couple of years ago. So that's also a development that I think we're going to be talking about today. But back to looking at the gender divide, we also see on the right side of the screen here that we do have quite big differences in how boys and girls prioritize between different issues. So we see in general that girls tend to prioritize more long-term social issues. They place more importance on issues like environmental and climate issues, but also racism, gender equality, healthcare, while boys are tend to be more focused on economic issues like economic growth. They talk about energy policy and those issues that are more topical to the here and now of what's on the political agenda. So that's the state of where young people stand today on the political issues that are being discussed. We also are going to dive into a little bit where we stand specifically on the environmental issues. We have some different questions in our survey covering this issue. One of the questions that we ask is on a number of different topics if young people feel like their generation is going to be better or worse off than their parents were. And we asked specifically about the environment. And here we see that a lot of young people actually feel like their generation is going to be worse off than when it comes to the environment. But we see that this to a higher extent among girls. And if we look at who is feeling more positive about the environment, that is actually more boys than girls. So looking at this, we also see that maybe boys tend to worry a little bit less about the environment in the future. We also actually look about worry or stress about environmental issues, specifically among the youth today. We ask, in the last 6 months, how often or how rarely have you felt stressed about the climate? And here we also see a gender divide. Girls tend to be a lot more stressed, or more girls are stressed about the climate. But the big divide we actually see is among those who say that they never stress about the climate. And there we see a lot more young boys saying that I don't stress about the climate ever. And that's quite an interesting topic that I'm sure we can debate as well in this coming hour. And we have also an interesting nuance of this is that we also ask about, are you feeling stressed about having a sustainable lifestyle? And I'll ask you to note here that we actually see overall more young people stressing about having a sustainable lifestyle than about the climate issues. So this tells you a little bit how young people think. They actually place a lot of pressure on themselves and can be more stressed about having to perform or what they can do themselves to meet these types of issues. So the stress is more about having a sustainable lifestyle than actually the climate issue itself. But here we also see a big gender divide coming back here. A lot more girls are stressed on a weekly basis about having a sustainable lifestyle than we see that boys stress about having a sustainable lifestyle. So I'm gonna finish this part of the presentation with carrying us into the next topic in the report that's launched here today, which is of course about engagement in the climate issue. And one of the questions that we ask here is, what ways do young people think that it's appropriate to use to influence something in society today? And we are talking about Generation Z here, or Gen Z. So they are, of course, a very social media savvy generation. And of course, then we see that writing or sharing content on social media is what comes up highest here. That's what most young people feel is the appropriate method of influencing something in society. But then we also have these more type of organizational ways of influencing things in society. So joining a political party or supporting or joining an organization such as Greenpeace or Amnesty are also ways that young people think are good ways to influence something in society. But here we also see this gender divide that this report that we're going to look at mentions or talks about. And this is supporting or joining an organization. We see that a lot more young girls feel that this is the best way or best method to change something in society compared to young boys. That we actually see that this is not just what happens in the organization, but it's actually an attitude that young people have in society today. I think I'm gonna finish here and invite Åsa back into the studio.
Thank you, Johanna, so much for this presentation. Lots of figures and graphs, but super interesting results, I think, and things that we could, of course, dig deeper into during the discussion. I think I just want to check in briefly here with Sara first and see, are there any immediate questions in the chat after the presentation?
Yes, We do have a question from Thomas, who is joining us here. Thank you, Thomas. We have a question which I think is quite specific for a graph that you showed on. Let me just check. It's in the last 6 months, how often or rarely have you felt stressed about the climate?
Yeah.
And then it was never stressed about the climate, and then it was a graph weekly stressed about the climate. So the question was, why the divide, why just the never, and why the weekly? So maybe you could explain, Johanna, how you sort of asked
really
the question.
Good. We love these very specific questions at Ungdomsbarometern. We are survey nerds in the end. So that's a really good point to make. That's actually not the whole representation of the questions that's asked, but the respondents are giving more timestamps than were shown here. So you're asked, how often do you stress about these different issues? So they're asked a lot about a lot of different issues. So I think the options they are given are every day, several times a week, once a month, less rarely than once a month, and once every year or so, or never. So that's sort of just picking out the groups that say never and picking out the groups that say once a week or more that we've grouped together in this graph.
And there were some interesting contradictions here also that you highlighted between and also these gender gaps. But I was just curious, because you've been doing this many years at Ungdomsbarometern. Were there any other sort of surprises or things that stand out in this survey compared to previous years?
I think the sort of decrease in engagement in society was a really large topic, or something that we really looked at in the survey this year. We had a lot of different topics that we couldn't cover everything in the presentation here today, but we see that just in Sweden, the faith that young Swedish people have in politicians being able to sort out the problems that we have, that's also decreasing quite significantly. So the interest in society is down, the sort of faith or confidence we have in politicians is going down, and we don't really see overall that young people are sort of taking action. What we see is that young people are turning more to themselves and focusing, what can I do to feel good, to take care of themselves. We see a lot of focus on health in this young generation. We see a lot of focus on finances, sorting out your personal finances. So we're talking more about this very individualistic perspective on life. And that's of course dangerous when young people lose sort of their connection to society.
That is, and also we have other reports showing that it can help you also with your mental health if you do get engaged in something that is larger than yourself and you feel a sense of belonging and everything. So, but we'll come back to that topic as well. But it's some kind of hyper individualism at play here. But what gives you hope? I mean, we also see that there is a lot of engagement in certain ways, and that they do respond, that they do things online, or some would also engage in organizations. So I don't know if that's a contradictory trend here.
One of the latest things I saw that brought me a lot of hope, we actually just launched a survey among even younger respondents. So we did a study in the 7 to 14 group. So what is going to, or is probably named Generation Alpha. The next youth generation, if you would say so. And there we see, when we ask them about what do you think will be important for you in the future, so when you're grown up, what do you think you're going to care about? And helping others was on the top of that list. And I think that is really hopeful.
That is very hopeful. And you guys in the audience, what do you think? What makes you hopeful, or what do you think is your best tip for a more, when we focus on health and mental health? Do you think it helps to join an organization and work on issues that you care about? Share in the chat. Should we check in with you again, Sara, before we leave Johanna?
Yes, and we do have questions coming in, and we have Jennifer who's asking 2 questions. How many individuals answered this survey? And then, is there an analysis of where the respondents come from in terms of urban versus non-urban areas and things like that?
Very relevant questions.
Yes, very good question. Back to the survey nerdiness.
Yeah. We love it.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the survey as a whole has over 15,000 respondents. Then not every respondent answers every single questions because that would take a long time. So we have a base about 1,500 to 3,000 respondents per question. And for the survey as a whole, we use what is called a quota selection. So it's representative looking at Sweden as a total. It's representative on gender, it's representative on age, and also on geographics. So it's spread all over the countries, and we make sure that it's representative both for, as we said, big cities and more rural areas. So the survey as a whole is supposed to look at like Sweden as a whole.
So a lot of work put in there to get a lot as good representation as possible. Do you see a trend? Is it increasingly difficult to get young people to respond and engage? Or
Definitely, yes. That's one of the issues that we struggle with, and we're doing okay, but we see that attention spans are becoming shorter. We can ask less and less questions because people drop out of our studies. So we have to think about both how we recruit survey respondents, but also how we structure our surveys. How many questions can one respondent answer before they sort of get enough and switch apps and look at something different? So that's something you have to stay on top of all the time.
Well, that sounds in line with other studies that have been made as well. Sara, do we have a final question for Johanna?
Yes. We have.
I'm super glad that you ask so many questions, by the way. We should really encourage that.
Anna Maria asks, what was the question behind the hopeful answers among the 7 to 14th group again? So what was the question that they sort of got?
So the question was phrased as, now it's asked in Swedish, so this is going to be a translation, but the question is asked, what do you think will be important for you in the future? So with sort of with a long-term perspective, and there are a lot of different answer alternatives. So we also, in the list of alternatives, we have helping others, but we also have make a lot of money, own an apartment, travel the world, and a lot of different aspects of life that we then can see how they place in importance in relation to each other.
So it's a multiple choice kind of. Interesting. Great. Sara, any other?
Yes, I mean, we have one very, it's a bit of a long question, but I will try and see. So can you elaborate, Johanna, on your target group for the studies? The reason is that for the question is that there's a tendency that youth organize themselves on an ad hoc basis and more informally and less through traditional organizations, which you also mentioned, I think, in your presentation. But does the survey take this into consideration, is the question.
So, that's a very good question and a clarification. So this survey that I presented today is not in relation to youth organization. This is the survey that's done at the youth population in Sweden at large. So it's a big survey. This was just a few snippets from the survey. It asks everything from education choices, work-life choices, food consumption. It covers a lot of different topics. It's not specific to this project that we are discussing today. It's not only done on people involved in youth organizations. This is a youth population study.
But I mean, you have that question about how would you do, or which channels would you use to impact society or impact politics, and then they can also tick different boxes.
Yes, definitely. So that's answered by the population at large, not just people who are involved in this type of organizations.
Exactly, and there you also had social media at the top, right?
Exactly.
So could also point towards more ad hoc, initiatives that could also be administered on social media. All right, great questions. Thank you, everyone. I think this gives a really good segue to our next speaker. So let's thank you, Johanna, for now. You will be back later.
Yes.
And I will introduce our next keynote, who is Jimmy Sand, and he's an analyst and researcher at Nordic Information for Gender, and he's been writing this report for us about climate, youth and gender. And you will offer insights on how Nordic youth movements and other organizations can approach inclusivity and diversity based on interviews, a survey, focus group, etc. So we're really happy to have you here. Very welcome, Jimmy. As before, just put your questions and comments in the chat. Very welcome.
Thank you, Åsa, for the very nice introduction, and thank you, Johanna, for the very interesting presentation from the Youth Barometer. My name is Jimmy Sand. I work as an analyst at NIC, a cooperation body on the Nordic Council of Ministers for Gender Equality and LGBTI, located at the Swedish Secretariat for Gender Research, University of Gothenburg. And the report I'm going to present is an output from the Gender Project in the Nordic program on sustainable living, where different sectors of the Nordic collaboration has been working together since 2021. And we have previously published an overview of research with gender analysis of sustainable and unsustainable lifestyles within themes such as food, housing and energy, transport, clothing and consumer goods. And now we have this survey, this study, together with Nordregio, of young people's engagement in sustainability, based on a focus group at the Regeneration Week last year, an annual Nordic Baltic Youth Summit for Sustainability. Interviews with representatives of 6 different organizations for climate and sustainability, and a survey to board members of youth organizations in the 5 Nordic countries. And as we have seen in previous studies, young people seem to be more concerned about climate change than the generations before. We had this Greta effect that was talked about around 2018. And a global survey published 2021 in the Lancet Planetary Health Journal revealed that 59% of the respondents were extremely concerned about climate change. So that was a bit later than what we had talked about earlier in 2018. But we can see differences at group level between men and women, boys and girls, which we also saw in the Youth Barometer, Ungdomsbarometern. As persons who identify themselves as female are more concerned about climate change, as well as about gender equality, which we also saw. And some studies, for example, one on secondary schools in Sweden, indicate that the group not only less interested but strongly opposed to measures against climate change are dominated by young men, as we also saw in the presentation earlier. And in previous research, we have also seen differences depending on the level of education and also on educational orientation. And the present study here indicates that young women studying social science at university level in specific are overrepresented in environmental and climate organizations. But while men are a minority among those involved, those who actually are there tend to be more visible than others, something that reflects the structures in society in which the organizations operate, as one of the interviewees pointed out. So what can organizations do if they want to do something about this situation in terms of representation or increasing the social diversity in youth organizations? Well, based on the experience expressed in the study, we have found some advice on the matter. One is putting the issue on the agenda. You need to address the issue, analyze the obstacles in your own organization, make knowledge-raising efforts, perhaps seek help from other organizations. This is something that both in the survey and the interviews and the focus group that people have been talking about, advice based on their experience. Further, policies on discrimination and harassment are important if they are implemented at least. And you could consider requirements for representation in this decision making, along with guidelines about taking up space, speaking time, and so on. Creating safe spaces and culture of openness is strongly emphasized by many in the survey, and also in the interviews this has been pointed to, and as well as inclusive language that avoids jargon and similar phenomena that can be an obstacle for engagement. And in both recruitment and campaigning, it can be wise to look beyond established patterns, to do activities in other areas than you're used to, and trying to reach, if you want to reach other groups than those already involved, and to collaborate with others to reach out to these new target groups. For example, organizations that have kind of a different set of members than you have yourself. And there are also some advice on reviewing formal barriers for involvement and perhaps lowering unnecessary requirements and skills in recruitment. And there are also some bigger discussions that the study has been pointed to, and they also are very much in line with previous research that indicate that women are more often than men involved in environmental or climate organizations. Those in higher education and especially social sciences, as we have seen, are more often involved than those in vocational secondary school. And those living in bigger cities are more often involved than those in rural areas. And these are challenges for the youth organizations that they point to, and which reflects social norms and structures in society at large. And since organizations have limited resources and are often struggling to prioritize, it's a tricky question. Should they try to convince more people to join them, or use the resources for capacity building, strengthening those who are already interested? Is it important to try to convince those more strongly opposed to, for example, climate measures, or just try to reach those who perhaps don't feel they have time to be involved because they are busy in coping with their life, or something like that? And working with ambassadors and partnerships seems to be a way forward, judging by experience. And there also can be a kind of trade-off between working on the issue of social diversity in the organizations, who is getting involved, and the social dimension of climate and the environment, who is being affected by climate change and environmental degradation. Focusing on gender and climate could even make some boys, young men, be more opposed, judging by the difference in interest for both gender equality and climate. But an intersectional approach, integrating social class, regionality, minority issues, perhaps race and ethnicity, for example, could be a way to handle this, focusing not only on gender, but also class, for example. And as we have seen in previous studies, social norms on masculinity and femininity are significant aspects of the involvement in these issues. And as one person in the study puts it, the traditional masculinity culture works against empathy and caring values. It is all about sustaining an unsustainable lifestyle, using big petrol-driven cars, eating meat, etc. We need to show alternatives for men and to encourage emotions. That is something that have been said in the study. If you're interested in reading more on gender and the green transition, Nick has published 2 other reports. The research overview that I previously mentioned, where we looked at research with gender analysis on sustainable and unsustainable lifestyles, where one result was that individuals that are more oriented towards ideals of care appear to be more committed to sustainable development. That is both women and men. If you are more oriented towards this kind of more like a feminine value, you're also more often concerned about climate and sustainability. And we also have this collection of results for previous reports with a main focus on STEM education and professions and the gender segregated labor market, about green jobs. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jimmy. Fantastic and interesting, this in-depth study that you've made with youth, in this case, youth who are engaged in different organizations. And a lot to learn. I think we'll do as last time. We'll get over to you, Sara, to see what's happening in the chat. Are there any questions or comments?
There's a very interesting reflection from Finland, from Laura. Thank you, Laura. And Laura says that in Finland, it has been in the news recently that the attitudes of women and men have recently diverged from each other. It can be seen that women are more aware of social issues, for example, girls' rights and environmental issues, and men have started to support traditional values. And this, thank you for this reflection. It's something that we could see, I mean, based on Jimmy's presentation as well. So Jimmy, do you have a reflection?
Exactly. I think it's interesting to hear what you think or what you've seen also from based on your previous report here about consumption and gender and sustainable living. So what do you think are the main reasons behind this gender gap, or we call it in interest in these issues, or that some men have actually started working against it?
Yeah. It's based on the studies previously. It's difficult to see what kind of changes there are, but we could see the very clear connection between masculinity and those who are more into eating meat and driving fast cars and so on. Among men is also more oriented towards masculinity and to be viewed as real men, so to speak, while if we talk about men as a group, those who are also more taking more responsibility for unpaid household work and care work, they are also more committed to changing their lifestyles for more sustainability and are also more concerned about climate. So it's something that affects also the attitudes towards climate and sustainability.
But what have you also looked into? I mean, what could influence these male or feminine versus masculine coded behaviors or trends? Do you think social media plays a big role here, or have you looked into that at all? What, have they also responded to that somehow? What's impacting them? You can come a little bit closer.
Yeah, social media influence can be some part of it, but also, of course, the schools have a big role in it, especially in the lower ages, younger ages, and also, of course, but what we could see in previous research is how policy measures for trying to affect this distribution of the unpaid care work could also do something for this. Could be an effort to try to influence.
So the
both men and women.
Yeah, so the more men are sort of pulled into and become or bring out their inner caretaker.
Yeah, working
could have
for
an
more
effect.
care could have an effect, yes.
Care, more of a care culture, that's what's needed. I thought before we ask for more questions from you, Sarah, I was also really curious to know what were the key answers or main reasons that youth give for getting involved in a youth movement? Maybe that's a sort of number one question. Why would we do this at all? What do they say?
Yeah, some answers said that it was most of kind of a coincidence, or perhaps that they had friends who were involved, or parents even, or younger siblings. And then when they, what made them stay was they felt meaningful, and they got to make new experiences and also meeting new friends. But many also pointed towards that they had felt they have experienced social injustice, or were concerned about climate and want to do something about it. So it was could be very different things that affected them. But often they felt it was meaningful to be involved in the organizations. Yeah.
So it does bring a sense of meaning. What do you think out there, Sara? Do we have more comments?
We do. We have a very interesting reflection building on to the trends in Finland. And so in Finland, when there's a seminar, etc., with words climate change, the audience tends to be 80% women. When there are words like energy or technology, it tends to be 80% male. So words matter, Jaakko writes. So yeah, it's very interesting. Thank
Definitely.
you.
Yeah, and also that reminds me of one of the interviews where from Iceland, when they talked about how is the discussion in the public, where it's a lot about energy and a lot about the economic situation, as in other, but you could connect energy to climate, but that's not being done. So that could be a way to get more boys and young men interested as well. So, but of course, there's also great of discussion around green jobs and those things. So different things that could affect the interest, of course.
How to connect it. But you also mentioned that there might also actually be a little bit of a problem if it's a women-led organization, and then there are men coming in that maybe those women don't want to give away that power that they have to men, because they might have previous experience of men sort of taking over. How can we do with that? Because then you kind of end up in a catch-22 when it's difficult for a man to get in if you don't feel that you get trusted, or you don't get that opportunity because the women are a bit hesitant.
Yeah, so that is on the one hand, it's of course like many boys and young men are more used to taking up a lot of space, perhaps, and talking about things where they don't need to be have so much knowledge, but while women and young girls think it's more important to do that. But on the other hand, it's of course important, which is pointed to in the approaches and the advice on how to work on it. It's trying to have a safe space and an open climate to have different opinions met. So you have to work on it, as with all other things.
I know another thing that you felt was a bit, or maybe not surprising, but it's another big issue is that we also see sort of a bit of an ethnic divide, that more youth with minority background would say that they're not involved, or that they, or that the groups don't have, that youth organizations don't have that many with a foreign background.
Yeah.
How can we approach that?
Yeah, that was both in the interviews and also in the survey. And in the survey, it could be that those persons hadn't answered the survey. I don't know, because we didn't do that kind of analysis. But yeah, it's the thing that trying to have activities in other areas than you're used to. If we have a certain kind of people that are active in the organizations, and perhaps you have the activities where you feel at home, but you should perhaps have it somewhere else as well. That was something that they pointed to. Yeah, trying to look beyond what you're used to. Yeah.
And be more accessible and
Yeah,
reach out beyond your own neighborhood, maybe, to reach out to new people. And also I think that idea to collaborate with other organizations who might have a different target audience can be a really good thing to move forward. Sara, do we have a final question for Jimmy?
We have a lot of interesting discussion in the chat, so I'm just, I mean, there's reflections mostly, and a lot of people see this in their settings and environments. And
anyone who has an idea how to counteract it or how to work on this challenge of this sort of gender divide.
Also, we have one reflection here from Kajsa, who just came in with a comment. And it says, this discussion is based a lot on the words we use and how important that is. And here Kajsa says that she has a feeling that young guys or youth in general tend to engage for very local issues, not so much a general theme of climate. The closer the issue, the easier to involve and engage feelings and relate for the youth. But not all organizations, of course, are locally anchored. So maybe that's something, a reflection from the chat. Thank you, Kajsa.
And that also takes us a bit to maybe an urban-rural divide as well, when there are also different kinds of organizations, of course, some with a more global outlook, and then others who might be more local, but still might not be as locally engaged as some young people would like them to be. I think that's another interesting reflection. Time flies, so I think with that we will ask you to have a seat for a little bit, and Jimmy will be back in the discussion soon. And it's now time. Thank you so much, Jimmy. And it's time now to hear from our youth representatives and experts from various youth organizations that we have asked to comment on this report in relation to their own work and experience. So let's see, we have our youth speakers with us. It's Silje Brekke Bakken. You are political advisor at LNU, the Norwegian Children and Youth Council. And you're also coordinating our Nordic Youth Network for Sustainability. Super happy to have you with us today, Silje. And we also have Alva Danielsson here, and you are the movement coordinator at Regeneration 2030. It's been mentioned already and also been interviewed for the report, a Nordic-Baltic European climate movement for young people. And then last but not least, Oskar Molander, and you are the former Swedish youth delegate to the UN and been involved in several different youth organizations in your past. So very welcome all of you, and let's start with one at a time and hear your comments and thoughts on these reports and the findings. Start with Silje. So let's head over to Oslo and see how you're doing. Welcome, Silje.
Thank you, Åsa. And I want to start by saying thank you to Noregio and Nick for providing us with a very insightful and important report. So, like Åsa mentioned, I represent LNU, the Norwegian Children and Youth Council, where I am the international advisor. And we are an umbrella organization for more than 100 children and youth organizations here in Norway. And our members are everything from the political youth parties to leisure and nature organizations and student and pupils organizations, to mention a few. We work to strengthen the political and economic conditions for our members and to give young people a seat at the table, for example, by sending youth delegates to the United Nations. And I recognize many of the issues and points that were raised in the report, both from my own work, but also from conversations that I've had with representatives from our member organizations. And I could probably mention almost everything that was shared in the report when talking about my biggest takeaways, but I've tried to narrow it down to a few different points. So for a long time in Norway, and I'm sure in the rest of the Nordics as well, there was a great focus on getting girls to participate more in youth organizations and political youth parties, as they previously didn't as much. And that work certainly paid off, but the problem now kind of swings in the opposite direction. And many Norwegian organizations struggle to include boys. And as was mentioned in the report, girls make up the majority both in higher education, but also in climate and sustainability organizations. And what we have talked a lot about is the possibility that the language and the activities used in these organizations have become too academic or too foreign for some of the groups that we'd like to reach. And LNU, as an umbrella, are in no way exempt from this. One of the areas where I probably notice this the most is when we recruit youth delegates to the United Nations. There is a lot more female applicants, particularly in topics of climate and gender equality. So I really resonate with the report, who also mentioned these topics as the areas where it's difficult to engage boys. That's why I found the discussion regarding the importance of language, symbols, and outward communications to be particularly interesting in this report. And I think that when we promote the positions of youth delegate in the future, for instance, youth delegate on gender equality, I think we have a lot to gain by using more strategic language that caters as much to boys as to girls. And this could be anything from specifically mentioning that we really encourage boys to apply, or writing about how the youth delegate on, for instance, gender equality works not only with female topics, but equality for several different groups, things like that. We will also start reaching out more specifically to the organizations and groups that have the kind of members that we would like to reach. A great point from the report that I will include in my own work going forward. LNU has, in the last couple of years, worked a lot with engaging young minority boys in organizational activities, as this is probably the group that we struggle the most with reaching. The report touches on this and mentions the importance of capacity building and working with ambassadors who can influence their peers. And we in LNU really believe that this is an important way of doing things. And that's why we have created a program called Styrk, or Strengthen. In this project, we partner the bigger, more experienced member organizations with smaller, inexperienced, and often minority organizations. So in that way, the smaller organizations has a mentor or a mentor organization that they can learn from and build connections with. And this has been incredibly important in our work to reach more of the underrepresented groups, and something that I would highly recommend different countries to try to incorporate. So I lastly want to say that my biggest takeaway from the report is probably that the issues and solutions are multifactorial, and that shows the importance of today's seminar. I'm really excited to be here and to learn more from all of you. It's been really fun listening and learning from the other speakers. And I want to say thank you again. This report was quite a thought starter for us at LNU. So thank you.
So happy to hear this, Silja. And I mean, that's the whole point, obviously, of doing this report. Besides for us, sort of old farts, to try and understand what's going on in the youth movement, I think it's very important to try and understand or produce something that could be useful for you guys. And we should also really emphasize that the report is based very much on peer learning, in the sense that Jimmy has put an effort in interviewing and surveying people like yourself who are in the movement to try and really pick up, what are your best advice to others and what do you think is still difficult. So good to hear. And you'll stay with us, Silja, while we now turn our focus to Alva. To hear a little bit from the regeneration perspective, and you work. It's quite a different organization than LNU, right? You're much more network based. So yeah, what did you learn? What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Åsa, and thank you so much for having me here. I think so far this has been super interesting, and I've really enjoyed reading this report as well. I represent Regeneration 2030, and we are based on Åland, but we are kind of more of a network organization that we span across the Nordics and the Baltics, and also further down in Europe. So we also cover countries such as Poland and Germany, even Ukraine. So we cover a lot of ground, and we kind of connect and try to capacity build youth And one of the ways that we're doing this is with the annual summit on Åland, which was also mentioned in the report, because you guys were there as a part of this report as well at Regeneration Week, where we just gather lots of young people to connect and learn together. Yeah, and moving on to kind of my reflections on this report, I think one of the things that I reflected on was something that I've also had kind of in my mind for a while, and this kind of just confirmed it really, that everything is so interconnected, and all of the issues that we see in the world will also be reflected internally as well within our own organizations and movements. And so the same way that we can't really solve the climate crisis without addressing things such as social injustices, colonialism or capitalism and those kinds of things, we can't, when we look at the context of organizing and community building or whatever it is, we can't be selective in what we do. These issues don't exist in a vacuum. They correlate to each other. And this report focuses on gender, but I also see other things mentioned in it, such as minorities or educational backgrounds, economic background, and all of those kinds of things. It's so connected to each other. And in that way, when we reflect upon these things, and when we also see how it is expressed within our own organization, I think that we can be more strategic and more intentional with how we are doing things, whether it's outreach or creating our own policies or a workspace or whatever it can be. And I want to lift one specific example that we actually did now at this year's Regeneration Week. So you guys were there last year in 2023. And now I just came home like 1 or 2 weeks ago from this year's Regeneration Week on Åland. One thing that is mentioned in this report as a suggested kind of solution to more inclusivity is creating a safe space so people feel like they are welcomed and feel safe in the organization that they joined. And when we start our summit or our event on Åland every year, we gather everyone and we create these community rules together. And this year we introduced the concept of the brave space, and compared to the safe space, a safe space is kind of an environment where you don't have to feel discomfort, right? You want always to feel safe. But when we're working with these super challenging topics, that is not always possible. Sometimes we need to step out and challenge and maybe experience discomfort. And so we introduced something that we call the brave space, which is kind of adopted by the ULEX project, so I'm not going to take the credit for it. But where we also talked about taking active responsibility, showing solidarity, and owning intentions and recognizing that these issues are complex. And so the discussions have to be complex. That can sometimes be hard. But when we did that, we also recognized that we have different experiences and we're coming from different situations. And that is okay. And we can kind of meet each other in the middle and help each other out. And so that way we can create an inclusive space that is in one way also safe, but also taking into consideration these challenges. Yeah, I think that was kind of my main reflection on this report. Of course, I feel like there's also a lot of other things that that I want to bring up, but I think for now I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Alva. Thank you. Super interesting, and I like that. We need safe space and we need a brave space, and I'm sure they're very connected. So it's when you've been for a bit in the safe space and you feel safe enough to be brave, probably as well, and you feel that your thoughts are and ideas are welcome. Super interesting, and we can also talk more about how the report can be useful in your work moving forward. Thank you, and you'll also stay with us while we turn to Oscar and hear from your point of view. What did you find most interesting in this report, and what's missing perhaps from your experience?
Yes, so first of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's amazing to be last, because then I've heard so much great things that I can just add to my own thoughts, and make it sound like it's mine No, but
Still with pride.
exactly. No, I love the idea with the brave space. Great idea. No, but so my first experience reading the report was that it was quite a humble experience. My previous role as a UN Youth delegate, a lot of my work, or what I advocated for, was to give more representation to youth. And reading this report and looking into the different results, it makes you think, okay, but how representative are we within the civil society movement as well? I mean, it's not only to make these leaders listen to youth. We need also to really make sure that we as youth organizations really do represent youth. And then we need different voices. And for the opportunity to bring different voices together, we need a lot of trust, and then we need a lot of safe spaces. One thing that I also thought about was who carries the responsibility, right? I mean, it's obvious that we have a lot of challenging hinders that makes it difficult for people or minorities to participate. And a lot of the times I feel like we talk about how minorities stands out from the norms, but we do not talk as much about what kind of structures we have that excludes the minority groups. And that's one thing I think could be added to the report. I mean, talking a bit more about the larger structures that we have that goes beyond having a civil society organization creating policy papers or such. I mean, youth organizations in general lack a lot of resources, for example, and with more resources, there's more capacity to be able to reach out to these different minority groups and take the times that's needed to actually really listen. Because that's also, I think, a thought that I've had, that we need to really create time to not just think how we perceive that these minority groups want us to include them, but actually listen to the minority groups on what they need and what they would need for us to include them better. Scattered thoughts, but a lot of thoughts, and a great report, and a lot of new knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar, for that. And it's okay to be speaking and thinking at the same time. I think this is all supposed to be a safe space for all kinds of thoughts. And we're again super happy to have the three of you with us today. I think your thoughts have spurred further thoughts in our chat. So over to you, Sara. What's popping?
I think we have a lot of people have been listening very carefully, so I want to encourage everyone to please drop your thoughts and your solutions and your challenges and the sort of barriers you see in your organizational settings or just daily life or different social settings, because then we can learn from each other. And we do have a question, which is I'm not sure if it's more something that we can take when we have Jimmy and Johanna with us on stage, because it's more of like, if there's a difference in the representation of young men, if you compare sort of like an activist profile climate organization, like say Extension Rebellion, for example, and the more academic ones. I'm not exactly sure if that's the question we should save.
We could save it, but we could also. Anyways, we will keep that one with us. And now welcome Johanna and Jimmy back to the table here with me. while we will also try and spotlight our three speakers on the screen here, so we can talk all of us. And yeah, all right, I'll head over here, and we'll try and stand not too far away from each other. So you get here, Jimmy, you'll stand here in the middle. So I get enormous, and you are in the back here, not very big. But anyway, as long as we can all hear each other, it's very important, of course, for you guys who are listening. So I thought before we take more questions from the chat, let's hear your reflections on our youth representatives here. What came to mind? I don't know, Johanna, maybe you want to start.
Yeah, but I think it's always so good to hear from people who are involved themselves, and for me, who works at the Youth Barometer, to hear from young people speaking. I'm not very old, but I'm older than the age group that we survey, so it's always good to be connected and hear like firsthand experiences of people working in this type of organizations. Of course, for me, who spends most of my time looking at the youth population at large, we don't see this group of very engaged young people. Of course, we know that they are out there, but we don't see them very heavily represented in our studies. As we talked about, we see the big cohort sort of moving more towards a more individualistic view on life, and how they sort of where they place their energy and focus in their day-to-day. So that's what I tend to be speaking about the most today. So it's really good to sort of hear and be in this type of organization or this type of discussion as well. It's really inspiring.
So we don't forget about all the youth who are engaged.
Exactly.
And I also think specifically what you talked about, Celia, to target these specifically minority background boys then, for example, who might be not so represented today. But then we also see if we can get more of them involved, maybe that can solve other challenges as well and make them feel more engaged in society overall and needed. So Jimmy, what do you think? What do you...
Yeah, I can only agree with
Take with
Johanna.
you.
It's been very interesting to hear your reflections from the others. And yeah, hearing about the work with the ambassadors that you're doing in Norway, and this idea of experiment perhaps on the brave spaces, it was very exciting to hear about, I think. Yeah, and of course how the different issues are connected, or the different factors or social dimensions, or what you want to call it, because the scope of the organizations are quite limited, of course, depending on resources. So it's very important to have this bigger perspective on how society as a whole should be how we should change it. So yeah. It's difficult to when you have these challenges. Who do you want to reach, and how do you talk about things? So, yeah, it's.
I think there were several things that Jimmy brought up as well that I would like to ask you, our youth representatives here, also to reflect upon a little bit. And it's this trade-off between prioritizing those who are already engaged and and work with their capacity building versus try to increase your member base and get more people involved, and then specifically reach out to sort of new groups. Do you think that is a trade-off or difficult for some organizations with limited resources, or do you think in general that youth organizations are good at both or working on both? Would you like to reflect on that? I don't know who has something to say. What do you say, Alva, from the region perspective? Is growing or getting stronger from inside more important?
I think, yes, there's definitely a trade-off, but I think this is one of the toughest questions, and one question that I experienced that we're struggling with in lots of different contexts that I'm involved in, both like in region and also in grassroots contexts and everywhere, because no matter which one we choose, they both require resources and capacity that we don't always have. But we also need both. We need to be able to capacity build those ones that are already engaged, and create resilience within our organization. And at the same time, we need more people coming in because we need more people in general involved, because that is the only way that we are going to achieve system change, right? If the general public still remains passive, then we're not going anywhere. But I think it's two separate focuses. And we have to be intentional about it and strategic about it. That's the only way to do it, I think. But it's tough.
Super interesting, I think, and very understandable. Silja, from your perspective, your role, basically your LNU's role is, I guess, both strengthen the youth organizations from inside, but also help them grow or give the different ideas. What is the trend? Is this a difficult issue for many organizations also in Norway?
Yeah, I for sure think that there's always going to be a certain trade-off, like Alva mentioned. But I do think that as long as an organization is mindful of the possibility that there are trades-off, you will mostly be fine. So what I mean by that is making sure that those who already care about a subject, those who are active members, get a chance to work not just with recruitment, but with other parts of the organizations as well. I think as long as members feel that they get a chance to use their engagement in a fun, in a proactive way, as long as they have these moments where they can do something that they want to do, then they don't mind as much having to spend some time on recruitment and activation, for example. So it's definitely a balance. I think the best way to go about doing it is making sure that the very engaged members also have a chance to do what they want and decide what they want to do, and to not make recruitment basically all that they do, because that's when people burn out.
Do you also keep track, or of course you do, on which organizations grow faster than others? Can you sort of see, is there certain types of organizations or interests that sort of that gain more attention or get more members? Is it a difference between different kinds of youth organizations?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not the one at LNU who works the most with that, but I do think that the political youth parties are growing quite most of the time. And we do have a trend, I think this was mentioned from Laura from Finland, that women and men or girls and boys tend to grow further apart when it comes to politics. And that is the same thing in Norway. It's been a big discussion here. And so I think you see like the political youth parties on maybe the centrum right part of the spectrum have grown a bit more. But at the same time, a lot of the climate organizations have also grown a bit. So it's a hard nut to crack. I'm not quite sure what that tells us, but yeah.
Perhaps then more women joining climate movement, and then the young men are joining the right party, or not. I mean, maybe that's a different discussion, or it's related to this, but we don't have the data right now, so I won't take more of your time to get deeper into this. Interesting to know. Oscar, do you think do you want to add anything to this discussion?
I can just add from the perspective of youth organizations. I mean, it's kind of structured in a way that you need to have the tap open and get more people engaged, because a lot of people leave when they're not considered as a youth anymore. So I think it's very important to really try to get as many people engaged as possible. The trade-off becomes bigger, of course, if you do not have a solid and clear intention with the organization or a very solid board, for example. But with those two combined, I think it doesn't have to be as big of a trade-off to include more members. Well, yeah.
Great. Sara, do we have any things to comments and questions?
We do. We have an interesting reflection from Anna Maria. Isn't there a problem when we put the responsibility on the climate organizations to include more guys? Isn't the problem rather masculinity norms and gender roles?
Super interesting and perfect segue to my next question, because I think that's of course one of the most interesting things in Jimmy's in your work, Jimmy, that you've tried to look at how these norms are still impacting us, and also while underlining that both men and women can have both of these, masculine or femininely coded values, but how can we impact those values, and what's the role of youth organizations in that, and also the role of others, or media or social media influencers, others. So what do you think? Who wants to reflect on this? How can we push this issue about the norms, sort of challenging these norms and this sort of hyper masculinity that kind of works as a pushback against the climate movement? I know, Alva, that you've been talking a lot about these things, and I don't know if you want to start this conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I don't know if I said it to Yime during our interview or if I just thought about it, but this exact thing, that we're here to work with climate issues. So this trend that we're seeing is just kind of a representation of society at large, right? But I think that doesn't take away, like I said before, that these issues don't exist in a vacuum, and everything that we see in society at large will also be reflected within our own organizations. And in working with inclusion and intersectionality in general, both in terms of gender, but also other things, that is, personally, I think that is the way to go. And I know that many other youth organizations also agree with me on that. So I think that it's not our issue to solve, but it's definitely something that we can't exclude or we can't ignore in our work.
What do you think? Oscar, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, well, I believe that education is really important in this aspect, but more than education, I think, of course, role models, and even organizations or companies, what do they value or show that is important for young men to engage in, and show what kind of qualities are perceived as valuable, for example, a leader, or whatever. I mean, it's really not only about what kind of things we contribute from our civil society organizations, but also just in general as individuals. How do we treat each other? What values do we show are important? And how can we engage the educational system to focus even more on helping particularly young men to get closer to these important values?
Yeah, the role of schools is something that we have also brought up in other previous reports that we've done here at Norregio as well. Of course, the school is often the place where you can meet all kinds of youth, right? I mean, the organizations kind of get a bit self-segregating. It's youth who are interested in a certain topic who would join. But if you want to talk to everyone or reach out to everyone, of course, you need some kind of collaboration with the schools. How is that working in Norway, Celia, or from the LNU perspective? Again, how do you see your role, or do you do specific work on these issues of masculinity, or feminine versus masculine values and things?
Yes, we do. I think it's probably one of the more complicated issues to talk about. And I agree with Alva that, even though it's not entirely the responsibility of the youth organizations, and it's no one's fault, they still can't ignore it. And that is something that we talk quite a bit about when we talk to them. And, I've talked to a lot of young men or young boys who want to participate, but maybe their way of participating is more physical, like having different kind of activities rather than a very theoretical participation. And some boys almost feel demonized by, wanting to have a more traditionally masculine, I don't really like that term, but activities like chopping wood or something, and kind of feel like that is almost become a problem when I think that a lot of organizations would benefit from having a more equal mix between theoretical or academic, but also some more like outdoorsy activities, stuff like that. So that is something that we try to guide them on how they can make sure that they cater to different kinds of people without telling them that one kind of norm or one kind of group is better than the other just because they have different interests. Yeah, sorry, I felt that was a bit rambling, but that's just some preliminary thoughts.
No, I think that's a very relevant, perspective, and also relates to what Alva and Oscar said earlier, that this is also all part of that. This issue is of course part of the global issue of polarization and the climate movement versus a certain pushback, etc., etc. I don't know. Do you want to comment on this as well before we ask Sara again for more questions from the chat? I mean, you've been thinking a lot about the value systems and what impacts those.
Yeah, I know. I think it's very wise reflections from the group on the screen or the other ones here. Perhaps it's not the responsibility of the organizations to try to reach those that are actively opposed to climate measures, but trying to work with it, of course. But the bigger group that are perhaps interested but not involved, how do we make them being more involved? And working with ambassadors and partnerships is something that several have pointed to. But of course, some projects or work on masculinity is probably good as well. But yeah, so
always keep up the discussion and help us question our norms and our gender roles is probably always very useful. And then also never forget this big group of people in the middle who might really benefit from getting involved, but maybe don't know exactly where to turn or how to do it, and see how that can how to improve engagement of that group. We can talk more about that in a second, but let's see what you have to add to this. Sara, what's popping in the chat?
We have very interesting questions. We have some reflections, I think 2 questions. We could start with this one that just came in from Lotta. Thank you, Lotta. And she says, in the beginning we saw that boys are more interested in societal questions, but what I don't understand is where and how they act on this. Maybe Silje just now answered this. More physical activities, is that the way to go? Thought that was a fun question and very, very interesting.
Yeah. What do you think? If we turn to you, Johanna, do you have any thoughts behind?
But I think that's one of the sort of interesting contradictions that we see in our data. That we see that men or young men, boys, are more interested in sort of society and policy issues and foreign policy issues, both domestic and foreign policy, but they are less engaged and less willing to engage in this type of organization. So when we looked at sort of the methods for influencing society, they were sort of equal when it came to joining a political party, but when it came to joining an organization, we actually saw the gender divide there. But we also saw the gender divide on what political issues you cared about. So the young men and the boys, they care more about the sort of economic policy, economic growth, the topical issues. Like now we talk a lot about energy policy. So then they care about energy policy. And that isn't maybe, as we've spoken about today, the topics that these kinds of organizations talk about a lot. So it doesn't translate to that sort of engagement.
So that would be interesting to see what kind of issues a more male sort of or what do we say, masculine, targeting environmental movement, how that could work, and what kind of issues, and how to get more men to feel that the organization is for them and more aligned with maybe their interests is one way forward. Or, as you said, Celia, it's about having or diversify the activities more and not get stuck in the academic ways of working. And we call them academic now. I think myself, it is to run an organization can be pretty heavy on administration, and that I think that is a challenge, also considering attention span and other challenges that we see with the youth generation for now. All right, super interesting. Anyone else who wanted to comment on this question from the chat? How to work with the boys. Right, let's see if we have something else, Sara.
We do, and we have one that kind of relates to this whole thing of doing activities and creating engagement. But here it is Jennifer who's saying that they're testing future prototypes and collaborative vision, making activities in our city as tools to engage city residents in climate work. So that's perhaps a bit different than these organizations and youth organizations, but still doing these activities in the city as tools to engage. And as ways to discuss and come together around a common vision of what we want to achieve and work towards. So, and then Jennifer asks, for the panelists and the audience, what do you imagine the role of youth and youth movements are taking in 2040? So that's a question, I guess, for the panelists and also for the chats.
That's a wonderful forward-looking question. Let's see, what do you think? What will the role be looking sort of into the future? And if we also want to counteract this current trend of individualism and maybe sort of certain hesitance towards getting involved, can there be other ways of organizing ourselves that we haven't seen yet? Or what do you think will be the role of youth organizations in the future? That is interesting. Celia, maybe you want to just share something from your...
I mean, it's obviously hard to look into the future. I definitely think that part of what youth organizations do will be, not everything, parts of it will be moved more online. I think that the competition from TikTok and social media is going to be even more challenging in the upcoming years. I mean, that's something I talk to LNews member about a lot, is that not only do they compete with other organizations, they also compete with a phone that is in your hand 24/7. So I think that's definitely a part of what youth organizations have to take into consideration for the future. But I do think that a lot of things are going to stay relatively similar. I think that young, engaged people are still going to find communities where they belong, which is probably the most important thing as well. I mean, we talk a lot about, in Norway, we have a big discussion around extremism now, and how loneliness is one of the most dangerous things in the world, and can have so many negative outcomes, extremism being obviously the worst outcome. So I think that especially like the youth councils where I work, we have a big role in also ensuring that youth organizations are able to continue giving young people community in the future. So I hope that's where we are in 2040.
Definitely, and counteract loneliness and extremism by actually helping youth to come together and do something meaningful instead. That sounds like the road to peace. Alva, what do you think? What will be the role of the climate movement or your work, do you think?
I think this is definitely not something that I have reflected upon. I usually avoid thinking that far into the future because I think it's scary. But I think just looking to the past and looking at historically how we have achieved systemic change and justice in the past, youth movements and youth organizations will always be relevant, I think. They will express themselves in vastly different ways because times change, but youth the youth has always been very relevant and very much in the forefront in different issues and different fights throughout history, and I think that it will continue in different ways, of course, but still.
We have a follow-up question from the chat, I think.
I think we actually are running out of time.
Oh, well, we are as well, but
It was too interesting.
the future perspective was super interesting. But I wanted to hear if you had, if it was a follow-up to this discussion. Otherwise, I just wanted to hear from Oscar as well before we close this discussion. Do you want to add anything, Sara? Sorry.
I can be
Yeah.
quick. Otherwise, we could probably talk forever about these topics. But no, I believe, as the other panelists said, that youth involvement and youth organization and community will always be important, considering that youth are innovative, and especially in 2040, with the digital era probably being even further than it is now, youth as digital natives will be super important to listen to and to take into consideration. And then we need to organize so that we have the representation that we need.
So we believe in a bright future for youth organizations, and I also think that my generation needs to continue to listen in a systematic way, and that's another way, of course, to make sure that youth organizations are relevant, that the political system and other the entire system also make sure to listen to youth in a systematic way and keep on serving what youth think. So with that, I think I want to, it's time to really thank all of you speakers here, Jimmy, Johanna, and also our speakers online, and of course all of you in the audience. Thank you so much for sharing your comments and thoughts. We'll save the chat as well so we can take this with us in our work moving forward. As I said, this has been recorded, so we'll share the recording and presentations and other links with you on email this week. And last but not least, we actually have a little advertisement to make for an upcoming conference that will actually conclude this entire sustainable living program that this is a part of. So we'll meet physically actually in Stockholm at Kulturhuset on 15 October for the Sustainable Living Summit. So if you can make it to Stockholm on the 15th of October, you get a full day, a very vibrant program with lots about youth engagement and integrating youth issues into the whole program, but also focusing on other related issues, food system, the cultural sector's role in sustainable living, the role of education, etc. Swan, Echo, Label, and other actors. So check out the program via the QR code here. And you can also follow this event online, and that also is, of course, an option if you don't want to travel. But with that, thank you so much for joining us today, and keep up the good work in all the youth organizations as well. Thank you.